Hey honey, I want to start by showing you my favorite flag. This is a flag I bought at a flea market in Los Angeles. It's a bit tattered. And it is my favorite flag. There you go. How's that? Stars and Stripes forever. This episode is called 9/11, or the second worst day of my life, on the date of September 11th, 2001. Well, I'll explain a little bit how this episode is going to go, and you can skip around to wherever you want to go. I did not plan on making this episode today, but today is September 11th, and I figured I should at least put something out there for you to give you a 1% understanding of what happened historically and all the layers involved. But there will be several more episodes on this in great detail with articles and quotes and evidence and data and diagrams and everything, so you have a well-rounded, deep library of information to draw from. As you know, in this channel, I don't tell you what to think, but I'd like to show you how to think, and then you can do what you want from there. But once in a while, I will tell you what I think, which I usually omit, because I'm waiting for that when you ask me in real life. And in this case, as I show you all the layers, how do I put this? Most people don't know what's actually going on in the world, with the world economy, with government, with energy. Most people don't know. Some people investigate it and they find out a little bit more. And then there are the insiders who actually know, and even those people are broken up so they don't know the entire information. People like you and me, if you choose to accept the challenge that I said in the introductory episodes, we are not the masses just swallowing any story they give us. We just try to investigate and learn what happens, what the story is. We try to get into everyone's shoes and their mindset and their time and their life and their milieu and why and the reasons why and the motives and what can infect the brain and the psychology behind it, which is hugely important, the biology, the economics, the truth. We're trying to find the truth. And I hope your loyalties are in the right place. My loyalties are always for the U.S. It's my favorite country. It's the best country in the world. It's the country that raised me, and I owe it my life. So my loyalties are always with the U.S. But that being said, we do always try to investigate everything just like a journalist, just like a scientist, right? And we can draw conclusions from there. So none of this is me praising or condemning anyone or anything. It's just me showing you information. Then you can draw your own opinion, and maybe that opinion will change over time and as you meet people and as you keep studying. I'm going to show you a lot today, but it's only not even 1% of, you can go down every rabbit hole, and and there's so many things to learn from this tragic day. Okay, so on September 11th, 2001, 19 men, Islamic terrorists, hijacked 4 commercial airplanes, most of them Boeings, I believe, from Dulles, I believe, Washington, D.C., and 2 from Logan Airport in Boston. And after the planes took off, within several minutes, I think 15 minutes for one of them, the hijackers, there's about 4 in each plane, stormed the cockpit. They had box cutters, they had fake bombs, mace, and they stormed the cockpit and they took over the plane. And they told everyone to calm down. We're going to head back to the hangar and we have some demands. But the people in charge of that unit, Mohammed Atta and his group, knew that that wasn't the plan. Even the 19 people who were a part of the hijacking did not know the entire plan, by the way. I believe 11 out of the 19 did not know that it was a suicide mission. They thought they would just be returning to a hangar and going to jail. They didn't think they would go see the afterlife. They would go to jail. Well, there's a quote. They didn't expect to go see glory. They expected to go see jail, something like that. So even of the 19, they did not disclose to everybody what the real plan was. Many of them were hired as the muscle. So these 4 planes took off. All 4 were hijacked successfully. You should study all of the details in this on your own, and I will go over it in other episodes. Mohammed Atta radioed to the cabin that everything's okay. We're going to head back to a hangar, but he did not know that he actually switched it to ATC. So ATC knew that there was a hijacking going on. Several minutes later, each plane flew into or ditched somewhere. The first plane, flown by Mohammed Atta, hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center in Manhattan, New York City, the greatest city in the U.S. And it hit it close to the top, and people saw it, and they thought an explosion had gone off. Mind you, this is at a time when not everyone had a camera in their pocket, so it's hard to get a lot of footage from it, but a lot of footage does exist. And so people did not know what was happening that morning. It was at 8:46 a.m. that the plane struck, until several minutes later, a second plane hit the second tower. They're called the Twin Towers. There's two towers. A second plane at a high rate of speed hit the second tower, much lower than the first. The south tower much lower than the north tower. So now the whole world knows this is not an accident. Something's going on. It's not like a random bomb went off or there's a smoke or there's a fire. This is, the world is under attack. The U.S. is under attack. Then there was reports of another plane. And people were like, how many planes have been hijacked here? And I remember at the time hearing rumors of 400 planes. And there's so much misinformation in the beginning just because we did not know what was happening. I think the craziest thing I heard was that Timothy McVeigh's father, because he had just been executed by the state, had hijacked a plane and flew it into the World Trade Center in Boston. I was like, all that sounds wrong. But it's okay. When you're at the crux of the situation, you don't know what's happening. A third plane later flew into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And later a fourth plane seemed to have been ditched in a rural field in Pennsylvania. At 8:46 a.m. on a very clear, blue, beautiful New York morning on the East Coast, the first plane hit the first tower, the North Tower. At 10:28, that tower fell down, completely fell down. At 9:03 a.m., the second plane hit the second tower, the South Tower, and at 9:59 a.m., that tower fell down. As you see, it was earlier than the first tower that got hit because the impact zone was lower. They chose those planes because they were going from the East Coast to the West Coast, so it has the most fuel on board, so it would have the most devastation, the most destruction. They chose those targets because it was a representation of the financial security and strength of the U.S., the greatest economy in the world, and also the military strength of the U.S. The Pentagon. The fourth plane, which was ditched, was believed to be headed towards the Capitol, the seat of legislation. The White House, they believe, would have been too difficult, as there's a no-fly zone over it and things like that. So they were aiming for, most likely, for Congress. The plane that hit the Pentagon struck it at 9:37 a.m. The plane that was ditched heroically in a rural field in Pennsylvania was at 10:03 a.m. At 5:21 in the evening, in the afternoon, in the evening, World Trade Center building number 7 fell down because of the debris that had fallen on it from World Trade Centers 1 and 2. So I hope you just revisit that section of it throughout your life and study the many, many stories involved. The people who were going to work that day, innocent people going to work in all levels of occupation, from making, coffee to janitors to C-suite elites, lawyers, accountants, things like that. And the stories of the people that jumped because it was just too hot and too smoky. The phone calls involved, and the firefighters and the police officers who went up instead of running away. They went up. And the engineers that came to the fire department and said, this thing is going to pancake down. So psychologically, we'll talk about terror management theory, carte blanche, what this gives government, what this does to humans. One of the big lessons for you down the line, much later down the line, is on terror management theory and what an event like this does to human psychology. And there are different ways to see humans. There's the individual, there's a small group, and then there's groupthink, and then the state, things like that. And you notice that the individual acts different than groupthink, right? So when something like this happens, in short, psychologically, you become hyper aware of your own mortality. You think that this place that could never be hit suddenly got hit in this most visually, auditory, profound way that you could never, even in your wildest dreams, imagine. So that's the part to analyze psychologically, and we'll go into all that into great detail later. I just want to give you a brief overview, even though I know that this video will be long, will end up being long. Let's pull over the whiteboard and go through some details, huh? 9/11, the second worst day of my life. 19 terrorists, 4 planes full of fuel. These are the times when it struck, when the tower fell. Struck, tower fell. This is when World Trade Center 7 fell. This is when the Pentagon was struck. This is when the field was struck by the men on board and the women on board that one. What's believed to have happened on that flight is that they became aware. I believe that flight was about 45 minutes delayed in its departure, and that's enough time for the men and women on board to become aware of what's happening to the country live. I mean, there's only this much time. So once their plane got hijacked, they knew most likely what the outcome would be. And they stormed and bravely, took over the cabin again, back. Unfortunately, they were met with their demise, but they most likely saved a lot more lives by not allowing it to go wherever the terrorists wanted it to go. I think that was piloted by Jara, I believe, who was in love. We'll even talk about the psychology of a terrorist. You'll see some humanity there, and wonder what's going on here. The goal of this channel for you is obviously don't just swallow whatever anyone's telling you, because government will always try to give you a story that's easy to parrot, because they're trying to amass a movement. But you and I, as learned people, we need to deeply analyze what's going on here layer by layer. When we see the humanity in certain people, or the reasons why, or what ideas are infecting their brains, and so that, we have to analyze all this stuff in case you want to work in intelligence, or you want to run for office. Even if you want to travel to those areas, you should know what's going on and why, and what the ramifications for things are, and why people are doing the things that they're doing, right? What if any of those men were born in the US? Would they have a different outcome? Would they be a different person? I don't know, but we need to be analyzing that. We don't just listen to whatever people say, well, here's what the answer is. We have to analyze it ourselves as amateur scientists. Eventually, the World Trade Center was rebuilt. It was rebuilt for profit, by the way. They had debated this for a long time, but from a real estate standpoint, I know that the argument was we can't just do like a memorial, because that's Manhattan real estate that isn't making money. So they turned it into a building again, which is great. It's a beautiful building. I've been there several times, and I will take you there to see the memorial and everything, and you can pay your respects and all that good stuff. Okay. On that day, 2,977 humans died. More people died afterwards from exposure to the toxic dust of the building and from cancer. A total of 4.5 million humans died in the wars thereafter, in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and so on. U.S. soldiers, altogether for the wars after, 4.5 million humans died as a result. Of the U.S. soldiers, 4 times as many U.S. soldiers died from suicides in the years after the wars than actually died in the wars. The total cost of the wars is about $8 trillion. You know that we went through in another episode how the span of million versus billion versus trillion, so hopefully you have an appreciation for that. 2.2 trillion is set aside for veterans benefits. We need to analyze what the expansion of powers are of the government after an event like this. They will view it as a carte blanche. So you'll create the Department of Homeland Security, TSA, which is a joke. The NSA gets an expansion of powers, habeas corpus. This is kind of awkward for me to say, but I just will say how it was. So I'm not gonna shy away from the truth, even though it feels weird to say. But some kids, when they grow up, they're into dinosaurs or sports or dancing or whatever. I don't know why, but at a very young age, I was into politics, government, international relations, economics, history. I was into the other stuff too, but from a very young age, that I would think is a weird age for like a young man to be into it. I was into it. I think it was maybe born from curiosity of what's going on around the world, what other people are going through. I don't think that was taught to me. It was just a thing that, it was more nature versus nurture. I had a better understanding than a lot of adults at a very young age. I don't know why, honey. It is weird, okay? I got into a bunch of leadership programs, and so they make you take like a picture at the end to show that you are, like to keep a record when you're, I don't know, like 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. I forget what age I was. And everyone had an obvious prop. Like you have to have like a prop with it. So they had, like a soccer ball or like a lacrosse stick or whatever. And I, for some reason, had a pulpit, and I was doing like the Bill Clinton thumb in a suit. And I think I had the Bible. And now looking at it, I'm like, what is going on? What is this shot? This is like insane. And even like the photographer was like, I've never seen something like this. So yeah, there's just weird stuff like that. I got the JFK Youth Leadership Award from RFK himself, RFK Jr. and his late wife. And I went to Boys State, but we'll talk about all that later. Rotary Youth Leadership. I don't know why. My mind was into that. One day I flipped on C-SPAN, and I remember looking and seeing, and I was like, this is the most boring thing I've ever seen. It was just old men in suits walking around a blue floor, like a blue carpeted floor. And then I was like, why is this so boring, and why is it on? So I just became curious about that. So I don't know why I was into it, but why I'm saying this is because when it happened, there were older people that asked me, hey Jake, what's really going on here? And I remember that distinctly, and I was honored by that because I had been doing my homework. And there's a lot of homework to do. As the years progress, you just learn more and more and more and more and more. But I did appreciate that I was a kid, basically. But they knew that I knew more than most of the adults and what the news was saying. I don't know why I was that way, hon. I don't know. It's not a brag or anything. It's just who I was. I don't know why. Yeah, after 9/11, people who looked like me were somewhat picked on, but also supported by my beautiful country, the United States of America, because the people are smart enough and wise enough and loving enough and good enough to think larger and not be that racist. But I did face racism. I didn't mind it because I was, maybe this is a brag, but I found it funny because of how pathetic the racist gesture was. I remember being called a sand N-word at least 4 times. There may have been more, but I remember distinctly, I could see their faces now, 4 times I was called that. And each time I just laughed. And they thought I would get insulted, but I just knew more than them at that age. And I felt bad for them, that they didn't know what to say. They were just angry. And so they said sand N-word. And I laughed because from a creative standpoint, I was like, that's the laziest insult ever. You're using an already racist, derogatory word used to harm a black person. And you're adding sand in front of it. There's not much sand in India. And also, India has nothing to do with this. There were so many layers of stupid with the insult that I just laughed. I was like, you're so dumb. But a lot of people aren't like that, but I for some reason was at that age. I was just like, you're so sad. And I remember there was once when my father went to a restaurant and a lady out of her truck screamed whites only and spit on his car. We don't mind. We understand. We're more magnanimous the way we are in terms of temperament. My family, I don't get angry easily, just because I feel like I'm above them. I don't mind saying that. I feel like I'm mentally above them. I will box and I will fight with my equals, but not with I'm like, who are you? You're a nothing person. So, but just want to let you know in case you ever face racism, whatever race you are, you'll be half me and half whatever your mother is. But racism exists, and it's oftentimes just a person who's just scared and alone, and they don't know what to say. So they just, I hope you don't take too much. Yeah, we'll go into racism of a big episode about that later. But yeah, sand N-word, and then the FBI called Bin Laden. He called him Olive. So in an attempt to find some humor, my folks were like, I guess we're olive skinned because we're Syrian Christian and from that section of India, so our skin's a bit different. But it was just a joke to keep us all happy and light. The reason why the date 9/11 was chosen is because on September 11th, 1683 was the move when Osama bin Laden believed that the Muslims were pushed back from their attempt to overtake Vienna through the Ottoman Empire, and so that's when the West had their big resurgence. So he wanted to use that date as a date for Islam to make a pushback. That's why it's September 11th. We'll go into all that stuff later. Yeah, okay. Let's talk about the man behind the tragedy, the perpetrator of it all, the mastermind. His name is Osama bin Laden. It's oftentimes spelled with an O, sometimes spelled with a U. Osama bin Laden. I believe Osama means lion, and then his family name is bin Laden. He was born in Saudi Arabia. The name Saudi Arabia is after the name Saud, like the House of Saud. So they're saying it is Saudi's Arabia. It's like if I'm saying it's like, Matthew's West. It's like that. So Saudi Arabia. He was born in Saudi Arabia. His father was worth $5 billion because around the 1930s, a U.S. company went to go see if there was oil in Saudi Arabia, and they found some. And now, because you find oil, you need to construct an area to be able to harness that oil and extract it and to have people live there, workers, employees, and their families. My friend who works in city building, he was conscripted by SpaceX. The guy at SpaceX showed him all of western Texas and goes, look, what do you see? And he goes, I see nothing but desert. He goes, exactly. We want to recruit the best rocket scientists, and they have their wives and their husbands with them. So they need places to go. They need schools, shopping malls, food places, fun places, things like that. So we got to build a city here. That just happened this year. And in the same respect, they wanted to build a city there. It's like a westernized, Americanized city for the American employees. So they did. And the construction magnate at the time was a man named Mohammed bin Laden. So he did the construction for so much of Saudi Arabia during the early 20th century. Roads and palaces and cities and everything. He really modernized it. He died in 1967 in a plane crash, which was piloted by an American in Saudi Arabia. He died. Yeah, he died at the age of 60-ish, I think, 55, something like that. He had several wives, several kids. One of his kids' name is Osama bin Laden. Then he had his wife. He had that wife, the mother of Osama bin Laden, remarry somebody else, and with him, she had another 3 or 4 kids. So Osama bin Laden has 3 or 4 half siblings. One of which died in a ultralight plane crash in San Antonio when he flew into some power lines. He was the pilot. That was in 1988, something like that. So this is a little bit of the family. So what you already ascertain here is what? They're wealthy. They grew up with a silver spoon in their mouth, right? Not like Somali pirates or anything like that who don't have anything to eat. They're wealthy. They have access to things and to really strong families and really powerful people. So that's a significant piece of data to consider. If you work in intelligence or government, you should know that, all right, so this man is coming from a wealthy background. The construction magnate was Mohammed bin Laden. One of his kids was Osama bin Laden. And so Osama was, I think, about 10 years old when his father died in a plane crash. Okay? And then Osama was educated in economics and business at the KAU, the King, I can never say the name, the King, I don't want to butcher the name, university. It's like a prestigious university there, and then there's another university there as well, and he also studied at Oxford. So they're rich, they have access to things, to like a good education. It's not like they don't know what's going on in the world, right? And then in 1979, there was a lot of calamity in the Middle East, as there often is, but in 1979 in particular, Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah of Iran, who was a puppet that was installed by the U.S., and it began an oil crisis to the U.S., and there was a hostage crisis as well, where they took, I think, 400 Americans hostage in 1979. At the same time, the Soviet Union, which now no longer exists legally, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and they thought it would be a easy, quick war, but it wasn't. They invaded Afghanistan in 1979, and a young Osama bin Laden found his calling. He was more religious and more fundamental to the Quran and to Islam than his siblings, and he found his calling. So at 22, 1979, he was born in 1957. So at 22, 1979, he joined the Mujahideen with his Afghan rebels. And the Mujahideen engaged in a war with the Soviet Union, who's a superpower versus like a ragtag group of militiamen. We'll study war like a lot throughout the channel, but when it comes to war, a war of attrition is arguably the worst war, guerrilla warfare, things like that. But it's when a less superior power needs to do whatever they can to effect a superpower. They engage in a war of attrition and guerrilla warfare. Same with Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, the war in Vietnam, things like that. So what Osama bin Laden also brought was a lot of money, because he has access to money. I think he inherited about $30 million of his father's empire and had a $7 million a year allowance. And he brought bulldozers and construction tools, and he's showing them, look, I have stuff you guys can use. They're like, okay. So, and he fought in that war for a full decade, until finally they won. The Mujahideen won. But the Mujahideen did not win on their own. At the time, the U.S. was engaged in what's called a Cold War, which is just the opposite of a hot war. Hot war is when you're directly fighting somebody. A Cold War is more you are enemies, but you're never directly attacking each other. Oftentimes you'll use a proxy, so that's called a proxy war. Right now we're engaged in a proxy war with Russia, modern day Soviet Union, through Ukraine, because we are sending arms to Ukraine and no soldiers, and so their soldiers use our arms, but it's actually the U.S. fighting Russia there, right? And there are other versions of like a proxy war if you want to consider Taiwan, even though there's no arms but there's cyber attacks and things like that. So we're engaged in a proxy war against the Soviet Union, against communism, against the Soviet Union. And how we are engaged in that is that we gave a lot of money to the Mujahideen, and we trained them. We gave about $12 billion altogether from the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and China to the Mujahideen. That's called Operation Cyclone by the CIA. It's under Reagan. So you'll see the Mujahideen in the Oval Office talking to Reagan, right, in the 80s. So, yeah. And eventually, the Mujahideen won that war, and they got their country back by 1989. It was a big moment because then the rest of the Middle East now looked at Osama bin Laden as somewhat of a hero. They're saying, look what he did, and he's saying, look how you can beat back a superpower just using this and using faith and all this stuff. Through the war of attrition, he won. It also essentially contributed to the bankruptcy of the Soviet Union because they just bled money out that way. And as you're noticing all along, this is kind of giving this man ideas. He's learning, he's drawing conclusions, he's making things up, and his mind is getting warped in one way or another. So this is what we want to focus on, is like why a guy does what he does, why a girl does what she does, what is influencing them, why the power of an idea. It can be like an infection, or it could be the greatest idea ever that changes everything for the better. We don't know. That's up to you to judge, okay? But I want to show you this man and why he's moving towards this eventual 9/11, which is the second worst day of my life. How did all this? I wasn't even born, during any of these wars. So this thing that happened so long before you is then affecting maybe your lifetime or after you, including now. There are probably things going on right now that are going to be affecting you that you are not here for. So that's what I kind of want to make you aware of. Yeah. So let's look here. Father's worth about $5 billion. He dies. Half brother dies. That's his allowance. He studied econ business. He's an elite in these schools, Oxford, etc. He worshipped Monty and De Gaulle. Also Qutbism. I don't know how to quite say that, but he is a polemic, or he is a thought leader from essentially before Osama's time that called for a caliphate and also pan-Islamism, things like that. So that really influenced him. Mujahideen, Cubanism, yep. Operation Cyclone, this much money, war of attrition, financially bankrupt. Oh, good. I'm basically covering everything. Yeah, this was one of the events that he quoted as being influential to him, the 1982 Sabra and Shatila massacre in Lebanon. By the U.S. and Israeli forces. Yeah. So what you have emerging from this 10-year war of attrition against a superpower like the Soviet Union is you have a war-hardened soldier. Okay? He's well-educated, rich, war-hardened now. He has the support of a lot of people in the Middle East. So you have, if you're working U.S. intelligence, you have a guy to watch on your hands here. This is not just some guy screaming outside without a microphone. He's proven himself to certain people. He has an education. He knows what he's doing. So this is a person to keep on your radar, and we failed to keep him on our radar. But this is, if you work in intelligence, this is what you should know. Yeah. So then in 1990, a man named Saddam Hussein. You should watch his 1979 bath party. Was it 1979? No, I think I got that year wrong. But it's the first live coup you can see on air. So all these coups that we hear about in history, we don't have any video of it. But this one, you can actually watch the video of everyone, and it's amazing to watch. Saddam Hussein, who supports pan-Arabism. So, okay, pan-Islamism is essentially saying that you're calling for a caliphate, which means that you want all of the Islamic nations to become one, ummah, one, community. But pan-Arabism is different because it's about the Arab races and their individual states. So some people support one and not the other. Some people don't support either. Some people support both, whatever. And what Osama bin Laden is noticing is that Saudi Arabia doesn't support either one. And he has a concern with that. He's calling for a caliphate, which many people have after his death, by the way. Al-Baghdadi, you should watch his speech in a mosque that I watched, and that's the start of ISIL, which I have well documented too. I can teach you all about that very difficult lesson. Osama bin Laden then started something called Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda just means the base, and they're looking for a home for that base. So in 1990, he started that in 1988. In 1990, Osama bin Laden was speaking against... we're talking about Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein decided to invade Kuwait, which is a small country rich in oil on its southern border. He decided to invade Kuwait. Saddam Hussein had the fourth largest army in the world at that time. So what's next after Kuwait? Saudi Arabia is afraid that they're going to be attacked next. So Osama bin Laden, having come from this decade-long war where he beat the Soviet Union, he offered his help. He said, we will fight, and we will help you, and we will successfully push back Saddam Hussein's army. And the House of Saud asked, how will you beat biological and chemical weapons? And Osama bin Laden said something to the effect of, we will do it by faith. And the House of Saud responded back, you don't have caves here to hide in, because in Afghanistan you have caves, you have caves. So it's harder, it's easier. So when we study war, we study the geography and why it works. In Vietnam, if you have the upper position on a mountain, you can shoot down. It's harder to be going up. It's easier to be shooting down in guerrilla warfare, and you have coverage of the trees and things like that, and the jungle. But here we don't have caves. That's what he said back. And so what Osama bin Laden is basically saying is, because he's a fundamentalist, he's saying it should be Muslims that are defending Arabia. This is a holy land. Mecca and Medina are both in Saudi Arabia. We don't want outside forces. We should be the ones fighting. And the House of Saud said no. And who they brought in was U.S. forces, and a lot of them. And it was the Secretary of Defense at the time, Dick Cheney, in 1990, who went to the House of Saud and offered our aid. And the House of Saud accepted the aid. And this really bothered Osama bin Laden. And he was ripping the prince until the point where the king said he is now a persona non grata, which means a person not welcomed. And eventually they revoked his Saudi citizenship and he had to leave. And he left. He went to Sudan, and Sudan allowed him to bring in whoever he wanted, and he grew Al-Qaeda there. Over time, the U.S. presence in Saudi Arabia is growing and expanding, and this is really angering Osama bin Laden. So he's saying this is like a holy land which shouldn't have any of these foreigners here. And eventually, Sudan kicked Osama bin Laden out, and he went to Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, he continued to grow the base being Al-Qaeda under Taliban protection. Okay, so this is kind of a map of what's going on in the dates and why things are growing the way they are and who's getting angry at who and why. You and I should be analyzing, or at least, one of my questions is, does he really have this commitment to Islam, or is he using religion as like a power move? A lot of people do that. They'll use religion as like a control mechanism, but they don't actually believe it themselves. They just want to use it as a control mechanism while the masses believe it, but the person in charge who's proliferating it isn't quite following the rules. So that's a interesting thing to ask. Is he privately breaking the rules of Islam and living a life of luxury or whatever while he's saying one thing or not? That's up to you to decide and to study, okay? In 1990, so now, Al-Qaeda is a group that wants some attention. That's how they view it, In 1993, they attempt to destroy the World Trade Center for the first time using bombs in the parking garage. 6 people were killed. It was unsuccessful. It was unsuccessful to bring the building down, but 6 people died, so that's not a good thing. In 1996 and 1998, Osama bin Laden declared what's called a fatwa, and you can read those online. It's sort of like his, Mein Kampf, or his, judicial decree, where he's saying here are all like the things wrong with the West, and here's what we got to do about it. This is my call to all good Muslims to do this and whatever. So it's just something that he wants to write down to declare his intentions that you can then draw from, especially if you work in intelligence. But as less people are taking him seriously, then he goes on the attack. That going on the attack was in 1998. There were 2 embassy bombings. Embassies are highly legally protected areas, so that's a considerable target. 2 embassy bombings in Kenya and in Tanzania that killed 224 people. 2 years later, there was a USS Cole bombing where he's showing that he can strike a US ship directly, and in the mess hall of that ship, 17 soldiers died. So he's now, definitely on the radar for the U.S. and for U.S. intelligence. I'll do many videos on intelligence. It's the most critical branch or department of government. They're the ones who are actually in charge. But in his fatwa, what he declared were the reasons for doing any of this crazy, bad, stupid stuff is the U.S. support for Israel, the U.S. presence in Saudi Arabia, sanctions against Iraq during the Gulf War, which ended up killing many, many people. And surprisingly, the environment. He wanted to save the environment. I mentioned that because it's kind of funny, right? Like as you're building who this guy is, it's like, okay, so it's not like oftentimes in history when it's done wrongly, you're seeing a character not for their human side. Like what are your intricacies? What are your idiosyncrasies? Are you just a guy killing everyone, or do you actually have a belief that you think you're right in, and if so, we can use that to effectively destroy you. But you have to get inside a person's mind. You have to know your enemy. When you know your enemy, then you know how to defeat your enemy. If you don't know your enemy, you don't know where their next move is going to go. But you can predict their next moves if you know your enemy. So that's why things like this are kind of important. After 9/11, in 2002, he had a letter to the American people. I think that wording is very important there. Letter to the American people, not to the presidency, not to the government, to the American people. 2004, he had another video. And when you study terrorism and counterterrorism and the rise of these things, the hardest thing to stop in intelligence is a lone wolf, which is just, and this is always mentioned in Orwell's stuff, it's hard to get the thought police. It's hard to know what's going on in your brain, but humans have a tendency to blabber. So once they blab, then that thought is now going to other people, and then there are leaks, right? But if you're a lone wolf who has a plan, who never tells anyone, and keeps your profile low, that's the hardest bomb to defuse. So right now there was a guy who shot our former President Trump. And so far, it appears he was a lone wolf. That is a very difficult bomb to defuse. He's not leaving a trace, much of a trace. And the next level is like a cell, which is like a small group of people. So there was something called the Hamburg cell in Hamburg, Germany. And it's just a small apartment where these men got together to discuss their ideas to do the next attack by Al-Qaeda. One of them was Mohammed Atta. There were 2 other ones that were selected, but they were seen as too weak, un-American, non-westernized. They didn't know how to order food. They didn't know how to speak the language. They were rude. So they're just kind of, dumb muscle. And that's what Osama bin Laden considered them. So he kept them on as the muscle. But then the brains were Mohammed Atta and all that stuff. And Mohammed Atta was considerably older than the other ones. I think maybe like 10 years older than the other ones. So that's the Hamburg cell. So as an intelligence community, you got to watch out for things like this. And then there are meetings in, Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia. And what you're noticing on a graph is slowly, but at a good rate, you're getting more. There's more evidence that something is happening. The attacks are getting stronger. They're not hitting the U.S. ships and U.S. military. Who are we dealing with here? What's his background? He has a lot of understanding of this place, and he has a history. Like, it's not just like a random guy. This is important when it comes to intelligence. If you ever work for the CIA or for the NSA, you should know this is how it's done. You got to build a profile on these people. I think I covered all of this. Yeah, I think I covered most everything for just a basic understanding of what happened that day, what was leading up to it, what happened like a little bit afterwards. This is not even 1% of what you should know. We can do a huge, deep dive for hours on this stuff, and I think you should. I think you should have an understanding of it if you want to be a historian or just have like an actual understanding of how things work in the world versus just somebody who's parodying something. You should actually know what's going on in the world and why, and then make your own assessments. A couple things I just want to end on here is like, there were small things that day. We have to forgive humans. Okay, like for example, there was a case that day of 9/11 where a manager said, "Let's go release all of our bad news today, because it'll be overwhelmed by the 9/11 news," and which is a very the fact that she's thinking that way is really strange and kind of gross, right? But humans like you and I, we just forgive people. They're just humans. They don't know what they're doing. Like that. I don't have a word for this, but like we need to get in a place where we're more magnanimous and just like forgiving. That is just a basic human tendency that of a bad person, and it's very easy to go take that bait. But that's just another person. That's this one. Our intelligence community failed. So there's like a couple questions you can ask there. What are we paying them for? I mean, we have no more privacy, and for what? They couldn't even stop this. And there were memos everywhere. There's memos with the FBI. There's memos with the NSA. There are memos with the CIA. There's memos from George Tenet, who's the head of the CIA, from Clark, who's the counterterrorism czar at the time, and through Condoleezza Rice. And they knew about so many meetings, and all of the breadcrumbs are there. Now they're becoming loaves. And no one quite did anything about it. And that's a failure of our government and of the intelligence community and of our presidency. The president doesn't legally swear an oath to protect the people. He swears an oath to protect the Constitution. If you want to go into like some of the psychology of that day, right after that attack happened, the president got a 91% approval rating, and what that means for government like this, like that lady that threw out the bad news with that day. There are people who think this kind of dark and twisted way. So they're thinking, well, look, now we have a carte blanche here. We can kind of do whatever we want for a while. And they did. They created all these departments that just invaded our privacy. And that with the advent of, social media, which is like, J. Edgar Hoover's dream, that everyone is voluntarily giving up all their information all the time. It just never made any sense to me. And they have everything monitored. And like, if you're getting something from it, then okay, I guess it's even justifiable at some degree. But if you're not, it's just an expansion of powers that led to you living a worse life, in my opinion. But that's up to you to debate. Clark, he apologized later. He said that your government has failed you. The intelligence community has failed you. I have failed you. And several other people said we had memos and emails sent from the FBI and in the NSA, but they never crossed over. Sometimes they legally can't, but they never crossed over. And I've seen this a lot with a lot of different divisions. I've seen local PD get shot to death because another department didn't warn them because they're not communicating. These are things that we have to work on as we get departments more efficient and also more proficient, because people are dying at the end. There are lines everywhere where they're saying we have two known Al-Qaeda in the U.S. Flight schools are reporting very strange flight lessons. We only want to learn how to take off. We don't want to learn how to land. It's like, what a strange thing. I think, on August 2001, bin Laden is determined to attack the U.S. That was a letter given for the president's eyes only. Yeah, so there's like a bit of like an American culture thing versus other cultures. In the UK, if this happened, they would sack the leader right away because you failed at your job. But in the US, the culture is more, we got attacked, let's now rally around this guy. But me, I was like, he's the one that failed in the job. He should be like removed immediately. Like, you left us open for this attack. You had all the memos. What is going on? What is the intelligence community for then? Like, you failed at your job. I just never understood that part. And then he went to other wars in Iraq, which we'll talk about at length, and the ramifications of that. Yeah, so a couple questions I have, which you want to be careful with this because there are so many, conspiracy theorists, and these people are just dumb, okay? They're just, bad people. Like, you can't just make up a conspiracy and go. You are allowed as a scientist to ask obvious questions, and then if it doesn't yield an answer, well, then you can draw, suspicion there, but that's the most you can do. But to make up a conspiracy theory and go spread misinformation and go, you confuse everyone is an evil thing, in my opinion. I think it's like the most evil thing you can do. And those people are stupid. They're just like losers, like these, David Icke people or Alex Jones. These are just loser people, absolute bottom-feeding losers. And in our attempt to always, find the actual truth, they're like muddying the conversation and just like distracting us because we're just trying to find the truth, which is what I mean by this. Like, you can ask, obvious questions. For example, my obvious question when I was a kid at that age was the plane that hit the Pentagon. There's only one grainy video of the hitting the Pentagon. That's the most safely guarded building in the world. And how's there only one video that's grainy hitting of the plane? It's only like a frame. You see like a frame of a sliver and then you see the fire. And I knew at the time they said that the FBI went to local gas stations and they grabbed all their CCTV. So that's not a conspiracy theory. You're just allowed to ask the government that. Remember, the government works for you. I think people need a reminder of that. These are not oligarchs. These are not people in charge of you. They're the ones who need to be audited. They're the ones who work for us. They're the ones who have to kowtow to us every day. And somehow now they got it twisted where you're worshiping these people. We shouldn't be worshiping them. That's not why the country was founded. It was directly founded to overthrow King George. That's why George Washington didn't want to accept a second term and all this stuff, because he didn't want to set the precedent that this is some sort of kingship. This is some sort of monarchy. It's the opposite of that. By the people, for the people. The people are in charge. You are in charge. And keep fighting that fight. I keep trying to remind people to stop this cult of personality worship. Their lives are great because of us, but they need to be on their knees. We're in charge here. You're in charge here. The American people are in charge here. So you're allowed to ask these questions. Why aren't there more videos? Where were the videos? I know there are more. That's obvious. And then other questions I have is, and this is just like a personal thing. The night on September 10th, Muhammad Atta and his associate left the hotel in Boston, and the flight that they're going to hijack in the morning was from Logan Airport in Boston. But on September 10th, they drove up to Portland, Maine, and I know that drive very well. I don't know why they did that. There's some obvious reasons that they don't want the security at Logan to be as harsh, so they want to go to a smaller airport, okay? Or that they were going to meet somebody up there. I think they made a couple calls, things like that, but we don't know who it's exactly to. But that is just another level of things that can go wrong. You can get into a car accident, the car can break down, you don't get your hotel, something can happen. It's just another layer, but I want to know why they went to Portland versus staying there going to Logan. And, there's no obvious answers. Like I said, one could be that both planes are coming out of Logan. You have one group coming up from here. It's just to, separate the attack. So, but that's one question I had, as well as where are the other videos? Covered all this. Yeah, just some, final thoughts for you to meditate on, and we could talk about it in real life if you want. As I interview really young people and I ask them about 9/11, they go, I don't know, like it's something. And I kind of like that answer in a way. And I kind of don't, but I kind of like that answer. Because maybe that's nature's way of healing a little bit. Maybe that's nature's way of saying they don't need to exactly 100% of the effect that you know about this thing. Just like I every year honor D-Day and Pearl Harbor, but I wasn't alive by a long shot for either of those. But I just do it because I love America and I love to honor our fallen. But maybe it's a healing thing that I wasn't alive then. And I actually have a little bit, like I'll never be as 100% in that as somebody who's alive back then or who was experiencing it. So maybe that's nature's way of healing a little bit, is that you learn about history and then you go, okay, we will honor it. We know about this. We've learned from it. And let's move on. And maybe that's nature's way to heal. That's all. And then there are things for that generation that they'll suffer and that they'll want to tell somebody else. But then the younger generation is like, I don't know what the pandemic was. And they're like, oh, well, son, that was a thing where we had to wear a mask. And it's like their own PTSD year. that the younger person's like, man, this person's a loser. Who cares about maths? I was so 2019, 2020. So that's like just like a philosophical thing we can reflect on there. And some final thoughts here are like, who's really in charge of your government? And this is why I say to take a less myopic and a more myopic view, and why like a lot of my videos are about giving you the accurate perspective. As we talk about Saudi Arabia and the oil and the construction magnate and all this stuff, mind you, we knew they had oil there in the 1930s. And we even knew what oil was only in the late 1800s. It's a new thing. And philosophically, it's about energy. And the world runs on energy. So whoever has control of that energy, they control the world. And they make a lot of money. That's what's happening here. So in a time much earlier, people didn't really care that much because they were just like, you're just like, like tribal people that you fracture. But once you find oil, we go, hey, hang on. We can help you out here. Let's work together. So that's a way to look at it myopically or less myopically. And so when you discuss the presidency or Congress, the role of those offices, it changes. It's different from the year 1820 versus after 9/11, right? We know there's 535 members of Congress. Most of them don't actually know what's going on in the U.S. That's only 535 people selected out of 330 million. Not all eligible, but 330 million. But even those 535 don't know exactly what's happening in the U.S. That's how protected the actual information is. And there's a quote from the intelligence community that goes like, "Why do we care about you? You'll be voted out maybe in the next 2 to 6 years, but we'll still be here. We work for like the CIA. Like we'll still be here. It's about intelligence." And if you hire a president, in the past you may have like a learned guy or girl who knows about international relations and all of the connections and all that stuff. Right now you essentially just have a mouthpiece. When they hired Trump and then he shot down Soleimani with a drone strike, Trump didn't know that name Soleimani ever. Okay, most people don't know who that is. But he was informed by his chief of staff in the situation room. He's informed, here's a target we find, here's a target we found, here's the actual reason behind the move. Here's what you're going to do, and then here's what you're going to announce, because you are the mouthpiece that somehow collects American support at this time. But he doesn't know what Soleimani is. So when you hire like a presidency or when you hire a politician, look out for what you're actually getting. Some people deeply know what's happening. So every year until they die, I always try to like evaluate who is the human that knows the most about what's really going on in the U.S. and how it works. So up until his death, it was George H.W. Bush. He just had like the most connections, everywhere from being wealthy to Yale to ambassador to China relations to vice president to Dick Cheney to oil connection to business connections with the Bin Laden family, things like. He knows the truth of what's actually happening. CIA, everything. He's like a real president who knows all the details. Or you have someone like Reagan who doesn't. Reagan, they famously had a cartoon where he has no arms and everyone's just doing everything for him. He's the mouthpiece. They had like a deal with him saying like, if you can be the mouthpiece, we will give you that seat and you just got to do what we say. So that's the thing to look out for when it comes to who these elected officials are. How much of them are just a mouthpiece and an actor versus somebody who actually knows what's going on, beforehand. And in their defense, they don't need to know everything. So somebody who's great with the economy, maybe they don't understand like the Middle East, but they'll be educated on it. I'm not saying this guy's an idiot. And also somebody who knows the Middle East, maybe they don't understand the economy. Like you can't know everything all the time. But just look out for that when you vote for somebody. Like what are you actually voting for there, right? It's the intelligence community that's really in charge, in my opinion. And intelligence has always been there. Spies have always been there. Okay, since the Han Dynasty days and India's old days and Benedict Arnold, all these things, and it just gets more and more and more advanced as the mode of spying becomes easier. From wiretapping now to spying on you, like the private citizen. You're hacking your phones, all these things. That's the power of the intelligence community. Yeah, as I'm reading and watching Lawrence of Arabia, I'm thinking about him in Arabia, and that's for World War I, and so it's a different time. The Israeli state hasn't been created yet. They don't quite know about oil. They're not like advanced yet, but they want to be. So the times are changing over large swaths. 10, 20, 30 years, you'll see big moves. And so stay abreast of that, okay, as an educated person. I think that's almost everything until my last thing here, which is the power of an idea. Idea inception. There's a great movie called Inception by my boy Christopher Nolan, and I think a lot of people forget what the power is behind that movie. It's not about the hallways or the water and all that stuff, or like the time dilation. It's called Inception. It's about the power of just inserting an idea. Like, when does a mind get an idea? And that is a extraordinarily powerful thing. I am just a vessel for an idea. I don't care about me. I'll be here. I'll be gone in like the blink of an eye. But I'm here to spread an idea. An idea can live on for a long time, and it can infect a mind like a disease. Or it can be the greatest thing for that mind, where you start moving mountains because of a great idea. You build amazing things. You help a lot of people. You bring people out of poverty, famine, all these things. So an idea is you got to protect your brain. There's a lot of things competing right now to go give you the idea. Here's what you should think. Here's what to think. And you can't recognize like the bubble you're in. It's just getting harder and harder each year. And even very learned, wise people don't realize it. And I see it all the time. So the power of an idea and inception, think about that. When did Osama bin Laden become this person? Born wealthy with access to everything, then by 22 goes to that war, sees certain things, writes about it, and then it's getting more hardened and more hardened and more hardened. And he has a quote saying that the difference between us and the West is that you guys love life, we love death. Some quote like that. And this is an argument that I have been making when I discuss war with learned people. You can predict what the end of war is. And here's how you do it. If the idea inside a person's mind is that this right now is hell, and the afterlife is the thing that I am hoping to get into, you're not going to beat that person. Because that is an idea, true or not, which I know the answer to, but you should know, I want you to have your own evaluation. You're not going to beat that by saying, we'll give you a 4-year college degree and we'll give you it's just not. Because at the end, when you're in the trenches, when you see someone's guts out, when you see someone's blown up, that one person's story is smiling at that, thinking this is a glorious day because I'm going to get what I'm going to get. And the other person's thinking, what the hell am I doing here? And so, I knew this going into the war in Afghanistan. I was like, it doesn't matter that we have a $1 trillion annual military budget, and these guys are, with an AK-47 in sandals. The dog in the fight, or the fight in the dog here, is it's you have to kill all of them. It's like if you take antibiotics, you can't just take some antibiotics at random. You have to take the whole course you kill it off. You can't just take it at random like aspirin. So for someone infected with an idea like this, that is such a powerful idea because they are not viewing this life as, this is hell for them. And they're excited to go into the next thing. So you have to make sure that you know how to go. That should inform you how to go fight that fight. It's hard to cut the head off that snake. You can do it, by the way. Al-Qaeda is significantly weaker now. ISIL is significantly weaker now, etc. And you should try to do it, always. But just be aware, know thy enemy. And because how they're viewing the world just maybe fundamentally different. They're just looking at it through like a different lens. They're not going after the same things you're going after. So that's the power of that's the power of an idea and how to predict the end of war before it even starts. You have to map these things out in your brain before you go to war with anybody. Not even literal war, but even in your own life when you're trying to get a job or trying to do anything competitive. You can already map out the war in your head and see what people's motives are and why and where does it come from and how can you defeat that. Sometimes it's not through arms, it's through negotiation, it's through charm, whatever. But that's how you can decide versus just coming in like a sledgehammer, not knowing your enemy. Know thy enemy, okay? Yeah, sorry this wasn't that great or that clear. I just want to get something out on 9/11 for you. This is a start, not even 1%. We can go into all this with. You should watch all the videos and hear the voices and stuff, and your heart breaks over and over and over and over and over again for everybody involved. It's just, war is hell. Okay, terrorism is hell. Man, it goes so deep psychologically in terms of groupthink and it's just, you should honor 9/11. You should honor it. You should honor it. My father, your grandfather that day, it's almost like when JFK got shot, everyone knew where they were. That's like a saying. Everyone knew where they were. Your grandfather that day was an engineer. He was at work, and everyone's gathered around the TV watching the news as it's coming live. And he said he got some scripture ready just in case anyone needed it. And I asked him what it was, and he shared it with me. If you'd like to hear it, This is from Romans 8. This is from Romans 8:35, okay? Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. He also left out verse 36, but... And I gave him some pushback on this quote today. I go, you know, the other side's saying the same thing about it from their scripture. And he started laughing. He said, yeah, this is all about, you know, ideology and stuff like that. But I just want you to know, I think that's like a beautiful moment where your grandfather got some words ready to hopefully comfort someone, anyone, if they wanted it. And he didn't have to use it that day. But yeah, I don't know, just some insight into people, right? All right, honey, I love you and I love you. I hope you're having a good day. It's a good day here. And God bless America. I love you and I love you.